This panel is going to examine how research institutions, in particular education centers like Boston University, can collaborate with outside partners to identify technologies and strategies for combating sea level rise and shifting coastlines. So we're back at the partnership model again. Let me first introduce our moderator, Lucy Hutyra, Professor of Earth and Environment at Boston University. She will be leading a discussion. I'll start with Gloria to her left. Gloria Waters is Vice President and Associate Provost of Research at Boston University. Gloria leads the university's research mission and strategy and provides an infrastructure for interdisciplinary, innovative research at one of the world's leading research institutions. To her left is Joan Fitzgerald. She's Director of the Law and Public Policy Program at Northeastern University. Joan is the author of Emerald Cities, Urban Sustainability, and Economic Development, which examines the relationship between climate change, energy dependence, and green economic development. And to her left is Andrew Rosenberg, Director of the Center for Science and Democracy at the Union of Concerned Scientists. Andy is the convening leader, author of the Oceans chapter of the U.S. Climate Impacts Advisory Panel, and someone who helped me many, many years when I wrote about fish. And then Bud's with us as well. I'll let Lucy start.
Thank you. I'm really excited.
Get your presentation.
I'm really excited to moderate this last session where we've heard about the basic science, we've heard about some of the challenges and actions that are taking place at the municipal level, and then in the last panel we heard about the private sector and what some of the challenges, actions, and opportunities that they were facing were. And in this last session, we're going to try to put it all together and think about how we do something really innovative and what the next generation is. And Bud, your lecture was fantastic, and I think that last slide really hit the nail on the head. Those challenges that you highlighted are exactly what many of us have been facing and thinking about in an academic setting for a long time. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to let Joan go first, and we'll save the questions for the end.
Okay. We've heard a lot today about the need to break down silos, whether it's among departments in a city, different organizations talking to each other, the need for scientists and policy people to be talking together. And I think it's important to move beyond talking to each other as the important thing. We need to work together. The kind of solutions that we need cross all kinds of disciplinary boundaries. I'm at Northeastern University, and Northeastern's taking a very different approach. I would call it somewhat of an experiment in how to do that. So several years ago, we defined 3 overarching missions of the university: security, sustainability, and health. And we went on a hiring spree that we're still on. But the thing is that everyone that's hired pretty much has to be in 2 different units. And that's the way we're kind of promoting interdisciplinarity. And it's made some very interesting combinations. So I'm in the School of Public Policy, and one of my colleagues here, Brian Helmuth, is half his appointment is marine biology, half in the School of Public Policy. We have engineers, we have architects, we have all the social sciences, and this is going on throughout the university. So it's very interesting to see where this will take us. But what we want to do in our School of Public Policy is do research that's relevant, do research that actually leads to policy change. But there's a real dilemma in that the reward structure of the university is set up that you're supposed to bring in the big NSF grants, you're supposed to publish in the top academic journals of your field, and that's as it should be. Those things are important. But it leads to what the late MIT urban planner Donald Schoen called the dilemma of rigor or relevance that we're faced with. So I'd like to read a quote from Don Schoen on this. In the varied topography of professional practice, there is a high hard ground overlooking a swamp. On the high ground, manageable problems lend themselves to solutions through the use of research-based theory and technique. In the swampy lowlands, problems are messy and confusing and incapable of technical solution. The irony of this situation is that the problems of the high ground tend to be relatively unimportant to individuals or society at large, however great their technical interests may be, while in the swamp lies the problems of greatest human concern. The practitioner is confronted with a choice. Shall he remain on the high ground where he can solve relatively unimportant problems according to his standards of rigor, or shall he descend to the swamp of important problems where he cannot be rigorous in any way he knows how to describe? So I made a choice in my career, going into urban policy and planning, to be in the swampy lowlands. And I wasn't working on climate change at the time, so I didn't know how literally true that would come to be later on. So the challenge is kind of to do both, to do that high-level research, but somehow to connect it and ground it. And Bud, I think your idea of the University City Research Consortium should be one big takeaway from this conference today. So I'd like to talk a little bit about how I'm trying to do that translational research with my colleagues at the Resilient Cities Lab, which we established a couple years ago in our School of Public Policy. And here's where some of the collaboration comes in, because if it's not one of the big NSF grants, who's going to fund this research? I happen to be sitting with a developer and a head of a construction company, and talking about this model that we have, and that we wanted to work on some issues around adaptation. And they both looked and said, we'll fund that for you. And that started what we're now calling the Resilient Cities Action Partnership. And in this partnership, there's about 5 or 6 of us now. We have the wrong slide. We have David Fannin and Michelle LeBoy, 2 architects that are working on the question of how do we define building resilience. We have myself, along with a landscape architect, Jane Amadon, working on the question of stormwater management and taking that beyond the building to a broader level. We have Matthias Ruth working on urban heat islands, and Matt Eckelman from engineering working on how we take models of civic infrastructure metrics, how the infrastructure of the United States is doing, and take that down to the local level. So my concern is when I do my research is how do we get beyond that building level? Somebody mentioned that earlier, I think it was you, Dennis, about if we just work at the building level in cities, it's not going to integrate very well. So that's one level at which we have to integrate. And so in stormwater management, if you think of that, we have 2 people looking at green building, defining those metrics, and one of the things they're interested in is stormwater management at the building level or the property level. Okay, but if we really want this to go to scale, so to speak, we need to look at it from the next level up, which is what is commonly referred to as low impact development. And that is a strategy for, at a broader scale, looking at how to restore the natural hydraulic systems of a particular area. So that's at that level. And then if you move that up higher, you have district level sustainability. So examples of that would be Boston's Innovation District, which is now co-located and called an Innovation District, and a couple of others. These are developing throughout the country. But the idea there that the district level sustainability project would also contain low impact development, district energy. It would create multiple infrastructures that are integrated. And then if you want to think of that at the regional level, that's what we call smart growth. So our research, what we hope to do, and what I hope to do in mine on this, is to help to inform city planners when they're making decisions of how to get to that low impact development, how to get beyond the building level and how to think about it. So what I've created here is a hierarchy of integrated stormwater management or low impact design, where you start with at the basic level when you're designing a particular space. And you see the difference at the top between a traditional development and a conservation subdivision. So just in how you locate on the property is the first order. The idea being that you start at the base, okay? And one of the things that I see so much often going on in cities is there's a lot of me too, copycat. Oh, Chicago's doing green roofs. We really need to do green roofs. They're important. They're really important in terms of each individual building, reducing heating and cooling costs, but they're irrelevant to stormwater management if that's all you're doing. So again, we start at the base. So then we have impervious surface reduction being the second most important element. And then we have what is commonly referred to as green infrastructure. Those are the canals we saw in the plan for Commonwealth Avenue, water plazas, cisterns, various kind of trenches, swales, etc. And so we are working on developing this hierarchy as a way of informing cities. But then in terms of what is the academic side of that, I'm also very interested in how cities work together, how they get beyond working in silos. And I go to a lot of practitioner conferences, and I hear this all the time. These are the technical, the design solutions. We know what those are. We may not know how to do different aspects of them, but where it's difficult is in the integration. And how do we get cities moving in a different direction in how they do urban planning is the academic side of what I study. So again, speaking to stormwater management, the project I have right now ongoing is looking at that process in Philadelphia. Philadelphia is the first city in the country that's responded to its consent decree to clean up the amount of polluted water it's putting into waterways with entirely green infrastructure. And that took them 3 years to get the EPA to go along with this plan that they developed. To do that, they created within their water department a whole new entity called the Office of Watershed, brought in a bunch of new young people that were trained to think this way in an integrated fashion, and developed the Green City Clean Waters Plan that feeds into their GreenWorks stormwater plan. So out of this, they developed green schools, green streets, green parks, green public facilities, green parking, green industry, green alleys, green homes. So you can see what they're doing is for every department there's a green something. And so the exact opposite of moving them in the direction of that low impact development. So what I've been doing is following them, interviewing people, finding out why they started this way. You start this way because that's the way the departments are organized, but realizing they didn't have buy-in from all these departments. So here you have this new organization within the water department saying, oh, here's transportation, here's how you're going to do streets now, parks, here's what we're doing to parks. This wasn't welcome. And so now they have to step back and figure that out. So as an academic planner, this is the process that I'm observing and writing about. But as a practitioner working with this group of construction engineers and developers working on how we think in a more integrated fashion. So the argument is here, I think we can do both together as universities in partnership with the public sector, with other universities, with cities and metropolitan governments. Thank you.
We'll stay with the theme of universities. Gloria Waters. Great, thanks.
So, good afternoon. It's really a pleasure to be here. I don't have slides. Yeah, okay. So, as I listened to the mayor's roundtable yesterday afternoon, it occurred to me how appropriate it is to have this conversation about collaboration between academic institutions and cities around the topic of climate change here at Boston University. So I don't know how many of you know about the history of Boston University, but it was founded in 1839. And from its inception, Boston University has thought of itself not just as Boston University, but as Boston's university. And it's really, I think, in our DNA that we need to be a part of the city and active in the city and collaborate with the city. And in fact, the third president of Boston University, Lemuel Merlin, put it as Boston University was founded in the heart of the city, in the service of the city. And I think that that's something that we take pretty seriously here at BU. So from the beginning, we've been actively engaged in our home city, and we are still very engaged in Boston today, I'd say. So we have, this tradition of active engagement with the city from the time that we were founded, and to today, it is instantiated in things such as the Menino Scholars Program that provides scholarships for students from Boston area high schools to attend BU. The work that we do in our medical center, we are an inner city kind of university, and in fact, in our strategic planning, one of our 8 commitments that we've made is to strengthen and expand the university's connection to Boston and to the world. And I think that I think people here really take that commitment seriously. And so today we, are a uniquely urban university. We have a trolley line running through the middle of our campus that makes us very urban. And I think, in addition to that, we're located in a city that's close to the sea. So we clearly are an appropriate setting for this kind of a topic. And I think, the other major characteristic of BU that makes it appropriate for this topic is the fact that we're, a major research university. And we're a comprehensive university with 17 different schools and colleges. And so we have faculty with expertise in pretty much every discipline that you could think of. And so another commitment in our strategic plan is to really focus on interdisciplinary research and to break down barriers and silos and to work across the different schools and colleges and really be leaders in important fields and to address some of the grand challenges that we have today by breaking down these barriers and working across schools and colleges. And as I listened to the roundtable last night, it occurred to me that the topic of climate change is certainly one that I think almost all of our schools and colleges have something to contribute to. I think that the relevance of some schools and colleges is, more obvious than others. So certainly the work that Tony was talking about on the National Climate Survey or the work that's carried out by our faculty in Earth and Environment, is obviously related to the topic of climate change. But, just listening yesterday, I think we have a terrific materials division in our College of Engineering. They can easily work on things such as how do you make materials so that you can make buildings more waterproof than they currently are. Our economists and faculty in the School of Management can certainly contribute to the kind of financial aspects of these sorts of things that we're talking about today. We've talked a lot about the importance of communication. So certainly, our College of Communication can play an important role in those kinds of areas. And just in our education of students, we can certainly in our education at the university level, but also through the work that we do in our School of Education, work on knowledge about climate change, even in the K-12 population. So we certainly have a lot to offer, and I think practically every school and college has something to contribute to this topic. I have to say, as I was sitting here last night, I thought, I wonder what the College of Fine Arts, what's their contribution to this? And then I was sitting last night next to Josh Willis at dinner, and so he told me that he's actually written a play about climate change that has become quite popular. And so I thought, well, there's a role that the arts can play in this also. And so certainly, it's clear that as a university we have a lot of expertise and talent that can contribute to research on this topic and both on mitigation of sea level rise and also on strategies for adaptation. So I think, as the VP for Research, one of my major roles is to identify areas of strength and to really figure out how our faculty can work together to solve important problems. And I think one of the things that we've been doing is thinking about how can we best organize the faculty to do interdisciplinary kind of work. One of the challenges of universities is that faculty are organized in schools and colleges. They live in departments. They belong in departments. That's who gives them their promotions and raises and all those kinds of things. And so, we've been working at how do we break down barriers to address some of these grand challenges and bring people across the different schools and colleges. And the way that we do it as a university is through our centers and institutes. And then positioning particular research initiatives within those centers and institutes. So, for example, the Initiatives on Cities, which hosted this conference, is housed within the Pardee School for the Longer Range Future. And it's a perfect example, I think, of the success that we're having of bringing faculty together across different schools and colleges within a center and then focusing on an initiative on a particular research topic, such as the Initiative on Cities. And, I think that kind of organization is helping us have some success in working across departments. I think, as you can imagine, cities are a tremendous repository of data, and we talked today about the challenges in having, that kind of coming up with solutions for those kinds of things. And I think that by working across our different centers and institutes, we're also having some success in bringing together really multiple interdisciplinary teams to work together. So, for example, our Hariri Institute for Computing and Computational Science and Engineering recently received a $1 million grant from the NSF to bring together investigators from computer science, electrical and computer engineering, earth and environment, strategy and innovation, city planning and urban affairs. Not only, so it's not only these people within the university, but also with city planning and urban affairs people, partners in Massachusetts businesses, people in the city, state agencies, planning groups. And the goal of the project is to use technology to solve everyday problems of cities. So faculty are working on things like ways to improve how we measure the mileage of motor vehicles in Boston, smart cities, smart traffic lights, how do you schedule public works kinds of projects and those sorts of things. What are the safest routes for different kinds of vehicles? So ultimately the goal of that project is to produce products and services that are going to be available to all cities through something that we also have done in a collaborative kind of way, which is the Massachusetts Open Cloud, which is a uniquely designed cloud that's run by BU and other university partners that we have. So these are great examples of collaborations, not just within the university, but also across the private and the public sectors. But I have to say, in my experience in this role, I think that we're pretty good at collaborations within the university, but these collaborations that go outside the university are really challenging for a number of reasons. I think that we don't yet have enough examples and experience with successful collaborations like this to actually have these things go smoothly for the faculty. So it takes a long time to sign off on contracts with the private sector or to to really make these things go in a smooth kind of way so that you can actually get the work done in a very efficient kind of way, the way that faculty who are working towards tenure and research goals really want to go. And I would say, as I thought about this, I think that there's an analogy to another area that I oversee at the university, which is our interactions with industry. It's also not easy for universities to interact with industry. Typically, there are all kinds of issues that come up in terms of intellectual property and collaboration and contracts and those kinds of things. And I think as an institution, we need to get better at doing those kinds of things so that we can really facilitate the work of the faculty so that they can actually, get this work done without a lot of red tape. And I think that something like the Initiative on Cities could really play an important role in that regard. So I think, for cities and for public institutions, having a one-stop place where you can come and I think, as in industry-sponsored research where we're trying to develop templates of contracts and term sheets and those kinds of things, I think if we could do those sorts of things for collaborations with other outside entities, for both private and public outside institutions, that would be something that would really help the faculty and move this area forward. I think there's a lot of expertise and there's a lot of willingness to work in a collaborative way with outside partners, especially with public organizations, with cities and those kinds of things. But we simply have not yet figured out how to do it in a way that is going to be really facilitatory of the work of the faculty. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And this has been a really interesting day. I'm going to take a slightly different take on the question about strategies for addressing sea level rise and not talk about technical strategies, but really thinking about how civil society organizations like Union of Concerned Scientists and many others represented in the room can potentially impact this debate. And what we have not talked about very much today is talking to the public. Talked a lot about talking to local officials, policymakers within, urban planners, but not very much to the public. And I lead a program at Union of Concerned Scientists, an organization Bud used to lead. I lead a new program called the Center for Science and Democracy about advancing the role of science in democratic process as well as public policy. And that's predicated on the idea that people need information to engage in democratic process to, if you like, exercise their democratic rights. And one way to I think about that is that there is a movement in this country to reinvigorate democracy because people see many broken parts of our democracy, or at least damaged parts of our democracy. And there's a lot of focus on things such as voting rights, which is entirely appropriate. But there also is an important need for people to have access to information in order to engage in the process, and to have equal access to information. It's not sufficient for either private sector or government to say, well, we have the information, we've looked at it, and we've figured out what we need to do. In this democracy, obviously, people want to engage and they want to be able to understand the societal choices we're making at least some level. Now, that doesn't mean that we need to turn everyone into scientists or that they need to have a deep level of scientific understanding, but it is true that people want to they want to reflect on their own experience and the scientific information that is available and is driving those societal choices as one input to societal choice. So my program is focused on that advancement of the role of science. We have capabilities of UCS, and for the purposes of this, that we want to leverage as a center on science and democracy, but for the purposes of this discussion, I'd say we need to leverage the capabilities of a large non-governmental organization or civil society set of organizations in places like Boston. And so we often talk about the many higher education institutions, the many universities and colleges in Boston, but there also is a very large community of civil society organizations which are extremely active, advocating for different kinds of activities, and they need to be part of the strategy for addressing sea level rise as well. And that means engaging citizens directly, and I want to talk about the idea of scientists being far more engaged as scientist citizens, talking to their fellow citizens about how we make these choices about how to address the challenge of sea level rise. And hopefully that works. Well, one of those challenges is, of course, we live in a very noisy information world. And there is no shortage of resources to build the megaphone for misinformation, not only about climate change, but about many other issues. And my program works on a range of other issues. And that misinformation can be, what we would all recognize as those who deny that climate change is even happening, but also at a much finer scale, what the implications might be within a particular community. Misinformation about what the costs might be. In other words, telling someone what the cost of rebuilding to account for sea level rise is, in some sense, misinformation unless you talk about the cost of not rebuilding. to account for sea level rise, not doing the adaptation activities that people have talked about today. So one important role that I think civil society organizations and scientists more broadly can play is trying to push back against misinformation and trying to help people understand really what is scientific evidence versus, in many cases, political spin. And we would encourage the science community broadly, not just universities, but of course many scientists work in the university sector, to try to help their fellow citizens to engage on these issues and try to push back on misinformation. Organizations like UCS, and again, my colleagues and other non-governmental organizations represented in the room, have a very different reach than a university. We have 400,000 members. Other organizations have large memberships. We have a different audience and we have a different way of engaging, and that's an important resource in any strategy to address challenges such as sea level rise. Now, we can produce reports. I have produced reports. Erica talked about a report this morning from UCS. I was involved in the National Climate Assessment, as other people here were. That's an important report. I am admiring of that. I'd like to be a report when I grow up. But I have to say that most citizens aren't going to sit down and read these reports. They're not going to read the academic papers. They're not going to go through even the summaries of the reports. They need some kind of other engagement, whether it be face-to-face or through social media. And so UCS has a science network of about 18,000 credentialed scientists who have said, we want to work with you on various issues. Well, those scientists aren't all climate scientists, and that raises an important point. The people who are observing and studying the impacts of climate change are not just the climate scientists. I'm a fisheries biologist. I observe the impacts of climate change in the areas that I study in the marine environment. That's true in almost every field that I can think of now, from infectious diseases to wildlife biology, to any natural resource field, to almost all of the engineering fields. You are observing effects and you have something to contribute to the scientific discussion. It's not just about whether you've actually modeled changes in climate per se, because that climate impact is, of course, affecting all natural systems. And so when I say we have a science network, many members of that network have the capability to talk about issues related to climate change. Of course, not all of them sea level rise, but some aspect of climate change. And they need to do that by communicating to fellow citizens. And I would note that we and many other organizations provide communications training for scientists. I actually think the first panel today illustrated how good some scientists have become at communicating to a general audience, from Scott and Erica. I think that we too often associate the idea of communicating to a general audience as either talking to national reporters or testifying before Congress, which is not nearly as much fun as anybody thinks it is, or working at a national level. But it isn't. It's giving a talk at a public library, or it's going to a local community meeting to try to help people understand information that's in front of them that might not be your research, but might simply be interpreting the graphs that were flashed up on the screen today, which is not something that many citizens would routinely do. And so the engagement by scientists has to be a critical part of a strategy of actually generating the democratic momentum to address things, challenges such as sea level rise and more broadly the impact of climate change. We and other organizations provide resources for scientists to do that, not only communications training, but it's not enough to just train people to talk in front of a crowd. You also need to help them understand, how do you talk to a reporter? How do you get to a reporter? How do you get a reporter to call you, Beth, wherever you are? It's not that easy to get people to come out and ask you the questions such that you can try to start to help people understand information as it's presented to them. So there's an engagement piece of this that goes well beyond communications training. We're working on that, and again, other institutions are as well. American Geophysical Union has an engagement strategy now, and we're working with them. AAAS has, American Association for Advancement of Science has such an engagement strategy, and many other organizations. And then finally, this goes back somewhat to universities, but not entirely, people need to expect that when you speak out on controversial issues, and climate change is certainly not the only one, but is a primary controversial issue, there can be real attacks on your science, on not only what you say in your research, but casting aspersions on your integrity. And we've unfortunately seen that. And universities need to be prepared, along with scientists, along with civil society, to defend against those attacks, whether it be demanding emails for public universities, which is now a growing pattern of trying to obtain emails from scientists working on climate, not just Michael Mann, in working in public universities so that someone can say, aha, one day you said something on an email which appears to be revealing, because I personally have never said anything on an email that I would not want taken out of context. I mean, but I've heard that other people have this problem. And so there are actual direct attacks on the process of science, on the scientists themselves, and we need to be prepared to defend those scientists, that they are doing the work that is supporting society broadly, that is supporting the need to adapt to challenges such as sea level rise. And so, in summary, science does play a critical role. My program works to advance that role of science in public policy, to encourage scientists to engage, and to defend them when they do. And I think that all three of those pieces are important for the broader set of civil society organizations as well as universities to engage in. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think I'm going to open it up for questions, and if nobody has one immediately, I have about 10. But let me open it to the audience first. A question over here.
Thank you. Todd Shank from MIT. This is certainly an issue that's important to me, and so thank you very much for your insights. However, if the chair would maybe entertain this, I actually wonder if we could turn the question around and maybe ask one or two people from the audience what they look for in partnerships when academia reaches out to them, whether it's the public sector like the BRA or a nonprofit like TBHA or even a for-profit enterprise.
I think that's a really good question. Sure. Who would like to answer that from the public sector? Tony, you're not, well.
Hybrid.
I'll trade you one response for one question.
Okay.
It seems like a fair deal, right? So I've been involved in a number of sort of collaborative partnerships with NGOs, with private companies, and to me, I mean, what I'm looking for out of that as a researcher is twofold. And one is to do something that's interesting and that we're going to learn something from. But the second is to do something that's useful and useful to all the participants. And so the academic side of that equation has oftentimes a very different criterion. But the other participants in that have something specific that they really do need to understand. And it's when those two sets of goals are in harmony that I think we actually get the most interesting and constructive collaborations. Okay, so that's my response. So now as part of the trade, I actually want to, you didn't actually agree to it, but I've got the microphone. I actually want to push back a little bit on the panel. Is it really true that particularly in research universities, but academics more generally, and in broader society, that we have such different sets of goals, that this divide between applied and basic research is really as wide as you made it sound? In ecology, which is where I was trained, we know about ecology largely because of challenges in managing natural resources and managing fisheries or forests or farms. And it's really out of that very practical experience that we learned most of what we actually know about the way that ecosystems work. In the most basic statistical test that we teach all of our students t-test, came out of the Guinness breweries as a way to compare the quality of different batches of beer, a very societally important question, and one of enormous economic value, even in the early 20th century, and a very nice piece of mathematics. Are we really that far apart? Is this really such a divide that we can't figure? We have a lot of smart people in the room that we can't figure out how to bridge that. So that's my challenge back.
If I could briefly respond first. So I'm somewhat early career, and I would argue that it is. I think back to when I was a postdoc, and I was unequivocally told that wait until you get tenure to do any relevant applied research, because you won't get tenure if you do. And I think that what Gloria described as a vision for changing the university is exactly the sort of direction that we should go, but I think that that divide is still very real.
Yeah, so Tony, I mean, in response to that, it's true, when you go up for tenure, there's teaching, there's research, and there's service, but we all know that service isn't an important part of those three things, and you're never going to get tenure on the basis of your service. And as much as, a university like Boston University has a big commitment to the city, that's not enough. It has, somebody like Lucy going up for tenure has to have publications in absolute top peer-reviewed journals. And so I think it is really tricky for junior faculty to figure out that balance. Now, I think, where it really works is if there can be a kind of collaboration where the work does lead to publications in, peer-reviewed journals that are respected as the person goes up for tenure. But that's not always the case. I guess my sense is that sometimes the needs of the other partner are so applied that that might not happen, or it might not, and teaching and student supervision and those kinds of things. I mean, these have to be projects where students can be involved, where they can publish and those sorts of things. So I think that there's often a divide there, but others might have other opinions.
Andrew?
Yeah.
So I get to wear one of my previous hats as a dean and say that unfortunately I agree that's the case, but let's remember that's a created system and we can change it. So wouldn't it be interesting if a university decided that they wanted to value engagement much more strongly? It's not as if it's immutable and, on tablets of stone somewhere. I would also say that from my experience as a faculty member, and I expect others in the room have this same experience, many of my graduate students did not want to go into academia, partly for this reason. They were looking to the NGO community, or sometimes government, sometimes other research institutions, because they weren't willing to say, well, you can talk about having an impact 7 years from now, but until then, keep your head down and write papers, because that's what we all did, which is never been a justification for anything, as far as I can tell, a good justification for anything, because we all did it that way, therefore you should. But that's effectively the reason that the rules are like that. So I think it can be changed. I want to go back to the previous question about what people are asking for, and reflect on a meeting I just attended, and I'll only take a minute to do this. UCS and the NAACP just held a meeting to talk about sea level rise and challenges for disadvantaged communities of color. And the questions from the various organizations that NAACP brought together were interesting, and they very clearly said, you don't need to convince us that climate change is having an impact, because we're the ones who feel that impact most severely in a disadvantaged community, and we're given the least resources to respond or to recover, inevitably, because for lots of reasons which would take, I think people would understand, but take too long to discuss here. So what we want is the ability to argue for what we observe in our communities on an equal footing in policy discussions, such that people can hear our voices. And going in and saying, we know this in our neighborhoods, doesn't seem to be persuasive, because somebody will trot out the latest report, frankly, and say, well, we've looked at that. And of course the money was distributed evenly It went according to, the value of homes. Oh, well, that would make a really even distribution. So their need was the capability to effectively lift up their voice so that they could argue in a public policy setting on an equal footing or a more equal footing. That's at least one of their needs. I don't mean to be unfair to the group because they had lots of other issues that they raised.
Just to your first comment, Andrew, about, a university could opt out. I mean, we as a School of Public Policy have written our tenure and promotion guidelines so that the kind of policy reports that impact anyone has on policy does get measured. But I don't think a university can do that, or a School of Public Policy on its own, any more than universities could say, we're not going to buy into U.S. News and World Report ratings. We're locked into somewhat of a prisoner's dilemma. And so if you have young faculty going up for tenure from other universities that don't embrace that view of impact, you're doing a disservice to your young faculty.
Well, we have lots of questions now. Why don't we start here and then work our way back? Graham.
I'm going to be very brief, but I think it's important to be very positive. There is tremendous potential in dual-use projects. The Initiative on Cities, our survey of mayors, that's something that's very useful for us, useful for mayors, but it is generating academic conference papers for my two colleagues, David Glick and Katie Einstein, which I hope will be journal articles. Second thing, to the private sector folks, do you remember James Carville had an infamous statement, you drag a $20 bill through a trailer park? Academics come really cheap.
Yes.
I don't know if I want to touch that comment on academics coming cheap. John Dozell with the Boston Redevelopment Authority. We're actually working with the universities here and broadly, both horizontally and vertically. And we actually have a somewhat of a self-interest in this, in that when we bring in folks, we're actually training them to do the kinds of work that we're doing. And they go back and they share that in their classes and their various academic settings, and then they show up at our door as future hires. So we, over long periods of time, you can see how this is advantageous to the city. I can even look around this room, from Dennis to Joan to lots of people, and we are partnering robustly across the place in different works, even whereas Paul out in our Dorchester neighborhoods on issues of equity. It's really a very comprehensive approach. What I think, though, is becoming very clear is we are all recognizing significant challenges, and I think it's become clear, too, that we cannot meet those challenges individually, right? So we are more than ever determined to work together. And I'm very recently very appreciative of our foundations who have this kind of glue role to play between the public sector and nonprofits and community groups and businesses. They have the ability to bring us together and enable purposeful work. It's fine what happens on the academic side of it. White papers or things that are about propelling students or faculty, but the applicability of that work in the public sector is I think what I see the foundations enabling. And so I wanted to point that out and simply encourage it. So the doors to City Hall are always open, and I know you all know how to get there, so I'll leave it at that.
Lucy, just to that point, I think the issue about talent is a really important and interesting one. We work with faculty a lot who want to work with industry, and I see a lot of parallels here between the issues. And the faculty always think that they want to work with industry because they're going to get sponsored research agreements and those sorts of things. In fact, when we talk to industry, the major reason that they want to come to universities is because they want talent. They want our talented students who are going to work in labs and then take jobs there. And I think, there are probably a lot of similarities here also. Talent is a major motivating factor for outside entities to work with the university, and we shouldn't forget that. Yeah.
A couple more comments, questions.
I'm Vivian Lee, the Boston Harbor Association. I just stepped aside from the conference and came from a meeting just now with the state to talk about a draft MIPA, Climate Change Adaptation and Resiliency Policy. And we were pushing to have the state move forward with the draft, go through the regulatory process. And the business community, particularly NIOP, threw back in our faces, oh, the uncertainty of the scientists. And I pulled out the program from today. Oh, no, well, they have difference of opinion. We don't know what, amount of sea level rise and such we should plan for planning purposes. So I think listening to that side, and particularly how they're trying to stop the regulatory process in terms of getting good public policy, I think we should also include other people in academia from the business schools as well. So not just the technical people here, but also some of the business folks, because I think if we get that perspective as well, I think it will help carry even more clout. The team that's here and all of the academics that all of us work with are tremendously talented, but I think sometimes in the business community, the real estate community, they need to also hear from people more like them. So I'd encourage that for future meetings as well.
Okay, in the back.
Thank you. Charlotte Kahn, formerly with the Boston Indicators Project at the Boston Foundation, now retired. But I'm glad Vivian raised that question because I was thinking of Mr. Rosenberg's slide, and you had the guitar, sort of acoustic guitar, and then the band. And somehow what's missing, this has been a fantastic conference. I love, but what's missing is this issue of communicating with the public and with key stakeholders, I think. So somehow we need something in the middle that's a bigger, a louder guitar or a more well-organized band that is not promoting disinformation, but information to the public, to the media. I mean, I'm sure we're all frustrated at the lack of coverage, really deep, ongoing coverage of climate change. Every once in a while, there's an article above the fold, and then it just drops out of public consciousness again. We need something, the academics and the nonprofit sector, all of us need to think about the communications challenge, not only the Union of Concerned Scientists. How do we all contribute to creating a kind of orchestral, big sound that can be sustained?
I think we have one more question up front, and then I'm going to turn it to the panel for a couple of quick last comments.
I want to pick up on what Charlotte just said, and on the same cartoon and what Vivian said. So my great grandfather was one of the judges at the witch trials and put 23 people to death for being quote unquote witches, right? And my dad, when he was 6, was almost killed by his government for being Jewish. So those were two very stark examples of civil society going mad, right? And we're not going to see that in Boston anytime soon, but it doesn't take much for the content to drop out of a debate when we get less civil. And we've now had a federal government changeover where it's going to be hard to get federal funding, whether it's NSF grants or rebuilding funds, that we almost didn't get Sandy rebuilding funds. My concern is that we've had 2 years of really, really positive conversation in Boston, but no money has changed hands yet, right? We haven't changed zoning, we haven't changed building codes, we don't know who's gonna pay for this. And I feel like when we get to that moment of friction, I, as a mild-mannered person, you all as mild-mannered people, we may not be great when you go up against the power of passion. Mm-hmm. And how do we lay that groundwork to keep our society civil as we did after the marathon bombing? Can we have that same social resilience when we have to dig in to whether we tax ourselves more or restrict ourselves more? I'm worried about that, and I'd love to hear some reflections.
That's a great comment, if I could turn that to the panel and turn that a bit more into a question. So this session was really focused on opportunities, and Bud laid out a beautiful slide of opportunities, but I'd like to turn it to you, building from all these comments that we've just had. Where would you start as far as actionable activities that we could really push forward now to take the policy, to take the education, to take these partnerships to the next level? And Bud, you had a slide on it, so maybe I'll start at that end and work our way forward.
Excuse me. And it kind of plays off what Vivian said. One point I didn't make was that in this goal of taking the science and translating it into useful guidance for policymakers, developers, and decision makers, ultimately it has to stand up in court. And that's the really hard part. The reason the FEMA maps only look back in time to make the maps is because they feel like they can defend that data in court because it goes back in time and you can point to it and say it's real, versus taking these projections and trying to defend them is much more complicated. So that's just a little segue. I think it's really important to get a big consortium going to sort of drive some consensus on what we should be planning for in the future. And it may not necessarily have to stand up in court, but we could sort of get everybody rallied around, we all agree to this, and let's start working to these goals. I think that would be really important.
Andrew.
Well, I would go back to the point I tried to make in my remarks before, and that is that we need to be speaking to the public, and I don't mean above the fold in a newspaper. I actually mean public interaction. I still believe that politicians respond to their constituents and that companies respond to their customers. And so if you need to drag the public policy machinery to a place where real change is happening, then I think you need to actually have people speaking out that this concerns them, this affects them directly. I don't think it's very hard to convince, particularly in Boston, local officials or organizations that this is important. But at a political level, I think that has to come from constituents. It's not going to be persuasive because of our next report.
Joan.
At a very broad level, I did a radio interview the other day, and the question was, with this election, can anything happen on climate? And I think the announcement of the U.S.-China agreement, kind of all the pessimism I was feeling, I felt a bit more optimistic because there's kind of no going back. And so what I said was, if you look, the military gets it. We have both on adaptation, you have the Navy all over what to do with sea level rise, and you also have on renewable energy, all branches of the service. And I would argue that the business community outside of, oil and fossil fuel interests is getting it too. And I think one of the things that Sandy, Fukushima, made the business community aware of is how vulnerable their supply chains are. And so two key constituencies that it's very difficult for a Republican base to criticize. So I think in some ways your idea of this broad coalition, but I would put the military and the business community front and center so that it's not just a bunch of university scientists or others who are promoting this case. And maybe it's the Green Ribbon Commission because all those constituencies are represented there. But I think we need to really emphasize that more.
Yeah, so I think the idea of engaging our business schools and also our colleges of communication and people who, I think we have an obligation to educate our students about how to talk about their work and their science to the public. That's not a part of the training of graduate students for the most part. Students are taught how to talk to a scientific community, how to present a paper at a scientific conference, but not how to talk to the public and how to defend their work. And I think that's an important part of training that we can take on as a university.
Well, great. I think that we should probably stop there, but let's thank the panel again for a great presentation.